He would crawl into bed naked with me and my sister and cuddle us. Askreddit on Reddit Rundown. What's a really messed up thing you've witnessed as a kid, but didn't realize it was until you were older? My mom had to work when I was little and my older sisters were in school. I was locked in the bathroom during the day until my sisters came home from school and let me out. Sometimes they wouldn't let me out, so they didn't have to watch me. They were 7 and 9 years older than me and I was somewhat afraid of them because they were not very nice to me, so I would often stay in the bathroom or hide in the hamper. It does explain why I'm perfectly okay to be alone. When I was a kid, all the kids would sleep in the basement on Christmas Eve to give space for Santa to drop off the presents. That night there was a lot of noise coming from outside on the street, but we couldn't see anything because there was snow covering the egress windows. My mom came downstairs and told us to stay there. But soon we heard sirens and saw police lights reflecting in the snow. There was a lot of commotion that we couldn't see. Then my dad came downstairs with the very real Santa Claus. He told us that his sleigh crashed in the snow and that the kind police officers were helping him get unstuck, and while they were working, he was visiting the kids in the neighborhood. He pulled out a present for each of us and sat with my family while we opened them and sang a few Christmas songs. When things calmed down outside, he went back to delivering toys. Years later I learned that there was a large gang fight outside of our house and that a few people died right outside. An older man from our church lived down the road, and knowing my parents had undoubtedly scared children at home, put on his Santa suit and came over once the police arrived. Santa was a hero to me as a child, but that man is a hero to me now. My mom used to sleep with dudes while I was in the same bed as her. Never really clicked till I got older. Let's say my therapist isn't a fan of my mother at all. Edit, to everyone replying with a similar situation. If you haven't sought out therapy, please do if it bothers you. It is not your fault, you did not do anything wrong, and you do matter. I know how it can make it feel like all of that is untrue though. Reach out if you need someone to talk to. My uncle on the farm took his really old dog for a walk in the woods when I was about 7. He came back without him, and when I cried asking where he was, my mom told me he must have gotten lost. So, every weekend for the rest of that summer I would put food and a blanket at the edge of the woods and sit and call his name. I was convinced he was finding his way to the food because it was being eaten, but he was too scared of getting in trouble for getting lost, so he was hiding in there. Lived in a townhouse. In my bedroom at night, I would hear the kids next door scream and cry. My parents called the police once, but the man claimed he was playing with his kids and didn't let them in, and apparently the police couldn't do anything. Found out when I was older that the man had later tried to kill the whole family, kids, baby included, with a pair of scissors. Somebody replied, I remember when I was about 11 or 12, our neighbors were a family of 5 kids. They were terrible. I was afraid of the dad who would curse and scream at his kids, and the neighbors' kids including my sister and I. He was an awful person. He would beat the hell out of those kids. He would take them into his bedroom, which was right across from my window, and I could hear everything. They would scream and cry. I can still hear it to this day. The next day the kids would be black and blue. I begged my parents to call the police, but they wouldn't. They weren't the greatest parents either. I have no idea how I was brave enough, but I anonymously called Child Protective Services, and I remember they came out the next day and interviewed the kids. Nothing ever happened, but the parents went around the neighborhood telling everyone they got a lawyer and they were going to sue whoever reported the false allegations. Horrible people. I had a cousin that committed suicide by jumping into a quarry. I was 12. My mom and I went to the wake, and when we got to the body, the casket was closed from the chest down. But it was glaringly obvious that he had been at least partially decapitated, because his head was just kind of awkwardly shoved on. They tried their best, but apparently you can't make that look natural. So, years later as an adult, I started wondering why in the world my mom would let me see that. So I asked her. It turned out to actually be a thing that no one in the family spoke about openly. My mom didn't know he would look like that, and neither did anyone else. After my cousin died, he was transported to a funeral home. My aunt insisted on an open casket, which the funeral home refused. It somehow escalated to the point that my aunt hired another funeral home on the condition they have a viewing. No one except my aunt knew any of this until after the wake. So, people start showing up, view the body, and see that he doesn't have a neck and was decapitated. And it isn't like you can go around and say FYI, the dead guy is all jacked up from jumping into a quarry and you really shouldn't look. My aunt hung herself in the kitchen while she was supposed to be babysitting me. I was 5, and asleep when it actually happened, so I didn't know my parents had gone out and left me with her. I remember waking up and walking into the kitchen and she was hanging, but it didn't really register that it was my aunt, because her face was obscured by her hair. I was by myself for more than a couple of hours until I started crying, can't remember why. Neighbors came to see what the fuss was about, and called my parents, and the police. Parents were pretty devastated because the reason they asked her to babysit me was because my brother had an emergency, ruptured appendix, and they came home to yellow tape around the house. At her funeral I was told she died because she had been sick. Was around 13-14 when I figured out it was suicide. Edit: my aunt was not selfish, or a bitch, or a cunt. What little I can remember of her I adore, and the rest of my family speaks of her glowingly. She was just depressed. She had already attempted suicide a year before I was born. Neither me nor my family hate or blame or resent her, because she wasn't in her right mind when she chose death. She was mentally ill, and we only hold her illness responsible. Not her. Thank you for all the empathy and support. I'm doing all right. By the time I realized how she died, I had already mourned and moved past the loss of a familiar face. The knowledge didn't affect me much. The only thing that is most probably a result of this is that I'm pretty apathetic when it comes to death in general, for which I see a therapist every now and then. But I'm okay. As a kid we had a young family in the neighborhood. Dad was about 30 and he would always play baseball with the neighborhood kids. For some reason anytime the ball went into his bushes, he would freak out like stop, I'll get it. I found out years later after he died, he was an alcoholic and was hiding it from his family. He died of cirrhosis and I found out he hid his bottles of vodka in the bushes. Really sad to think of now, because despite his illness/addiction, he was such a good influence on the kids in the neighborhood. Always taught us to respect elders and work hard at things if we want to become great. He was a great guy. Very sad to think about now. Cross-posting this comment from another question last year that was similar. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide-and-seek style game. She would yell hit the deck randomly and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. As a kid coming back from Halloween Horror Nights real late at night, I just stare out the window the whole ride home. I saw a truck with the windshield smashed completely out and a man sitting very stiff and unnatural in front of it. Now when I pass that same spot there's a memorial grave marker there and I realize that man was probably dead or dying, got thrown through his windshield. When I was about 6 or 7, I remember these two girls came to our house and proceeded to beat my mom up. My mom, being no more than 26 or so, was then shoved into the garbage can. She couldn't get out, and I remember just crying and holding my little sister who is no more than 1 year old at the time. It didn't really hit me until I was about 17. I never forgot what it looked like, my mom just crying and bleeding while trying to get out of the garbage can. Living in an abusive situation as a whole. As a child, domestic violence was the norm for me. When I was at a friend's from elementary school one time, and his parents were having a disagreement over something. I asked my friend when they'd start hitting each other and he just looked at me funny, not getting what I meant. As an adult, looking back on my childhood, it's only then you really understand how fucked up it all was. As a child it's intense and frightening, but you don't yet grasp the full situation yet. My parents fighting. Whoever was losing would say to me, I'm going to run away and kill/drown myself if mummy/daddy doesn't stop shouting. I can't take it anymore, and then proceed to leave the house. They're both still alive, and in hindsight I don't know if they ever meant what they said, but now I'm about to have a child of my own. I can't ever imagine doing that to a child, let alone my own child. One of my youngest memories was my dad crawling into bed naked with me and my sister and cuddle us. For most of my childhood, he did this often. When I got to be about 9 or 10, I realized he was pissing himself from drinking too much, and then waking up and stripping naked and just crawling to the closest bed. He used to pass out on the couch or recliner. I also remember we had roaches so bad that he didn't even care. I remember watching him swipe a roach off his plate while eating. Not killing it, just pushing it aside. Edit, getting a lot of comments about how things could have been worse. Unfortunately, they were. My response was to the question of what's something effed up that you witnessed as a kid that you didn't know was wrong. I knew everything else was wrong. My therapist has since confirmed that even this situation was wrong. I thought that that's what dads do when they get drunk. My earliest memory of it was around age 4. Thanks for listening to Reddit Rundown. Give a thumbs up and subscribe, and help me get to 1,000 subs. Leave a comment below on what kind of topics or stories you would like to hear. You can also check out other videos on my channel. Thanks and have an awesome day.